Hi everyone, welcome back. So in today's video I wanted to touch on the Walstad method again. I haven't posted a video on it for a while. I feel like I want to go back to it, and because I've got a lot of subs who were interested in it, and I just wanted to share a bit of information. So yeah, I think today's video might get a few people's backs up, but you know, I've been studying the Walstad method for a long time, and a lot of the information I see on the internet and YouTube is inaccurate. There's people out there who said they've created methods based on the Walstad method, and you know, they use the term data tank and stuff, and in my opinion, you know, the book is a scientific description of how an ecosystem, an aquatic ecosystem works. It's kind of like a PhD thesis. So to say you've adapted that is, you know, that in itself is quite wrong. And then how do you adapt nature? How do you take a scientific description of nature and say I've modified that? That in itself to me shows a lack of understanding, like a lack of appreciation for what the book actually is. It's the ecology of the planted aquarium. It's a scientific description based on the literature of an aquatic ecosystem, and you know, it's sold as this method that there's no water changes. So in the aquarium that the book was based on, written about, and the aquarium that was experimented with was a 55 gallon, which is 180 UK litres, and she's talking about changing 40 litres of water a month in it, which is, you know, it's probably about 10 gallons, I think, off the top of my head. But so this idea of no water changes, I don't know where it's come from. And then a lot of people jump on that and say, well, it's wrong to be promoting no water changes, but the book doesn't promote no water changes. That's a misconception of the book and the Walstad method. As I always say, the Walstad method is kind of a misnomer because it's based on a book. And then the term ecosystem, people are really misconstruing the idea of what an ecosystem is, and I think that's based on not reading the book, not understanding what Diana Walstad is fundamentally touching on. Because all the Walstad method, or the book is, it's about setting up a planted tank. Now, if you read the book and you understand it, it ties in with what Tom Barr teaches, tied in with Takashi Amano's idea, and then you've got people saying no CO2, no fertilizers. The whole concept of Diana Walstad's book is to say, look, if you create an ecosystem, it'll create the nutrients, the fertilizers, and it'll create the CO2 naturally on its own without having to dose them and inject them. So to say there's no, that kind of shows like a massive misunderstanding of what Diana Walstad was talking about. So I'm going to get into it into detail. Let's go. Let's discuss what we're actually trying to achieve, and not all these, you know, notions that are presented to us. So what we're actually really trying to achieve with Diana Walstad's ecology of a planted aquarium style Walstad method tank is we're trying to turn fish food and fish waste into nutrients, fertilizer that the plants can use to grow. Now, how this is done is our beneficial bacteria that's we promote in every, you know, we call it the cycle in every aquarium. Instead of doing the nitrogen cycle the way people talk about over and over consistently on the internet, what we're doing is nutrient cycling. So what we're doing is the plant fertilizer is being made by us feeding our fish a certain amount of food, that food being broken down into waste, which releases nitrogen, it releases phosphates, small amounts of potassium, it releases all the micronutrients, and the bacteria break this down into these nutrients by cycling, like nitrogen cycling, in this case nutrient cycling. And what it does is it comes into contact with the gravel, and that's where a lot of these beneficial bacteria are grown. Now, when we talk about cycling, we're talking about we need waste, we need ammonia, nitrite, nitrate, we need oxygen. Obviously, we say that the byproduct of the nitrogen cycle, we need ammonia and oxygen for the bacteria, and it produces nitrate and CO2. But there you go. You know, think about it in that simple terms. And the way we do this, and you'll see how this can be, you know, it's misconstrued by the internet. Here we have the substrate, and This is organic potting soil. It's organic topsoil mine, but it's basically clay, sand and organics designed to break down. It's not a compost. Everyone seems to be promoting compost. Composts aren't soils. They're a soil additive designed to be added to a soil that's lost its nutrients. We don't need nutrients in here, because we just discussed the nutrients come from the fish food. So thinking you need nutrients in here shows a massive misunderstanding straight away, doesn't it? You know, we've already established that, and now we're getting understanding the mechanics. Now if you see this fine line here, guess what that is? You always get, like with a mature Walstad tank, you'll always get like a fine line of like brownie substrate, which is biofilm, which is, guess what, it's our beneficial bacteria, and then we get this layer underneath and you get a rust line. See, there's, oh no, hydrogen sulfide. What's going on here? Well, I'll tell you what's going on here. There's the redox. So when people say you need 2 inches of sand, you're not getting the redox. So the oxygen isn't providing the beneficial bacteria what it needs, and then anaerobic conditions can happen. Now obviously there must be anaerobic conditions going on here. Look, there's little anaerobic pockets, but look around the plant roots. See the way there's all oxygen? See the way there's all beneficial bacteria around our plant roots? And that's what the plant roots do. They'll harbour beneficial bacteria. But if we've got, and then what happens is that you'll get the redox. The oxygen levels will get lower and lower, and it'll create anaerobic pockets. But as the anaerobic gases come up, hydrogen sulfide and stuff like that, nitrogen gas, as it comes into contact with the oxygenated water, it will oxidize it, and it'll just turn it into, you know, harmless gases. But you get that wrong, and this whole layer goes anaerobic, and you're dealing with bigger problems. So, and the whole process that you're trying to create is collapsing. So you're creating obstacles for yourself that you say you're trying to achieve, which to me doesn't make sense. But as I say, you need, in here, you're looking for, you need like a sand to give it structure. You need structure in here. I had grit. You've seen my grit, some of my videos. Organics, these are what the bacteria will break down, and as the fish food breaks down, it'll drop down here, and the micronutrients will end up in the soil at the roots, feeding the plants, while the macronutrients will be released. Likes of ammonia, nitrite, nitrate, phosphates will all be absorbed by the plants, and that's how we fertilise our plants, and that's how we create fertilisers and CO2. The byproduct of the nutrient cycling is CO2, the gas. It converts oxygen through its process into CO2. Now if you get it into an anaerobic environment, these processes are much slower and less reliable, and they start creating a plethora of other gases, hydrogen sulfide, nitrogen gas, nitrogen oxide, all these different gases, when ideally what we want to be producing is CO2. Obviously there's going to be a byproduct. There's anaerobic environments in every biofilm, but we want to be promoting the aerobic processes. That's the whole concept of an ecosystem in Diana Walstad's book. It's got nothing to do with anything else. So that's the first part on the soil and what we're trying to create. You know, Diana Walstad recommends using Miracle-Gro Organic, which is peat and organics. Obviously the organics are there to feed the bacteria, start the colony. But let me just sell you this idea. So a lot of people like, we need to get loads of nutrient rich soil in there. Well, nutrients, the more nutrient you have down here, the more the bacteria want to process it, and the more bacteria you create, the more anaerobic conditions you create. They'll consume all the oxygen and everything will become anaerobic. You don't want that to happen. Now if I said to you, I'm going to add a load of nutrients down here, I'm going to stockpile them for years. If I said I was creating an ecosystem, and what I was going to do is start it by adding an infinite amount of fish food at the bottom, you'd say to me, well, it's just going to crash. It's, you know, the water's going to fall really quickly and it's going to kill everything in there. It's the same fundamental idea. You don't need all them nutrients down there, because we're not trying to get nutrients down here by way of putting them down there. The whole concept we're trying to achieve is processing the nutrients into CO2 and fertilizers, natural fertilizers for our plants. Then there is our actual gravel. People are saying use sand, and they're saying use 2 inches. Every time I go on any sort of dirted aquarium forum, they're telling me you need to get 2 inches of sand, or all these things are going to happen. So they say all these negative things are going to happen, or proposed negative things. A lot of the, one of the main ones I hear is you'll get nutrients in your water column. Well, okay, the method accounts for that. It deals with that in its own way, and we'll get onto that in the plant section. But every positive that comes from using 2 inches of sand is well outweighed by the negatives that are covered in the book, that are explained in detail. And in the book it says use the particle size in relation to depth. So like 1/2 inch for a small grain size of sand, and then so if you to use big gravel, use 2 inches. You can't use one extreme for the depth and then another extreme for the particle size. It just causes more problems than it solves. It's all relative. So 1 inch, 1.5 inches of 3 mil to 3 mil pea gravel is bang in the middle, and that's what I suggest. Why go to extremities when we can just stick in the middle, and then we get the best of both worlds? But like I say, that's the whole point. In the gravel, you've got highly oxygenated area where the bacteria live, and then as it drops down the waste, it goes down here into all the micronutrients and macronutrients end up down here. The soil specifically formulated to explain that it absorbs nutrients and it locks them away for the plant roots, so the plant roots can feed at the roots. So it's that simple. It's really simple to understand, and everything ties back into what we're trying to achieve in the first place, which is to fertilize a planted tank using natural ecosystem methods, which is nutrient processing. Now, already you must be seeing that a lot of these techniques or methods, if you like, they just don't comply with the natural processes that we're trying to achieve. It goes against the whole process of creating a planted tank. You start adding problems to your planted tank, and it's like the water change one. I don't do any water changes. People say don't need. Well, where's the KH coming from? Because plants need KH, and beneficial bacteria need KH. As things cycle, they produce acids. These acids chip away at your KH. Now, think about this. People say to add all these KH supplements and stuff into your substrate mixture before you start. Now, can you confidently tell me that they break down at a certain rate over time and they don't overwhelm the system in the initial phases and then burn out? I've never I find a lot of these people who tell you to do these alternative things never explain why or the results of doing these things. And if I've got soft water, I'm in the UK, so a lot of mine's rainwater, my tap water, whereas in the United States, there's a lot of wells, and that water's groundwater. It's got a lot more mineral content. So can I use the same amount of KH as they are? I mean, these things, when we look at other types of planted tanks like Tom Barr's method or Takashi Amano's method, these things are measured really accurately. And in the textbook version of the Walstad method, she talks about adding the likes of Epsom salts and stuff to your water to build these things up, and we're measuring them quite accurately. But in some of these other techniques, they're just like haphazard. Dump this amount in. Is it the same if I've got hard water to soft water? What? You haven't explained this. So now then, we've covered the soil, the actual soil that you want to be using. We've covered the actual cap you want to be using. Now let's look at the actual plants. Now, a lot of these plants that are recommended for the actual ecology of the planted aquarium, Walstad method if you like, and not the internet. I've heard a few bits. The internet, I've heard a few things, so I'm gonna chirp in and use the clout from the word Walstad to promote myself that method. So in this actual textbook method, you're using heavy fibrous root feeding plants, the likes of Amazon swords, crypts, vals, dwarf sadgers, pongigetans, crinums, these things that get down into that substrate and want to feed from that substrate. A lot of these other methods, you see a lot of stem plants. Now what's a stem plant going to do? It primarily it's going to feed from the water column. So while you can put a few stem plants in there, it's going to feed from the water column, so therefore you don't really need a substrate. It's not going to feed on that mulm build-up, which is the goal of, it's what we're trying to achieve in the first instance. We're trying to get the plants to feed from that mulm layer. We're trying to get the bacteria to create that mulm layer, and then we're trying to get the plants to feed from that, which is, it's creating a natural fertilizer. But the likes of stem plants, they aren't going to feed from it. They're going to feed from the water column. So therefore we could just set up a tank. Think about what we're trying to achieve in the first instance. We could just use sand and put stems in, feed it, and the stems are going to feed from all that in the water column. But the problem with sand is the mulm will build up on top. Then you've got the mulm producing ammonia, lights, and that's just going to create a layer of cyanobacteria on top of the sand, which it tells you that these micronutrients and stuff, they're not getting down to the soil layer, which is quite dark, obviously, because it's got an inch of gravel on top of it. So these processes that we're trying to achieve are breaking down. And then for the people who say, well, if you use gravel, you're going to get nutrients in the water column. Well, that's what the floating plants are for. There's a whole section on the book called the aerial advantage, and the whole point in that is to use floating plants. And these floating plants, because they've got a affinity for, they've access to the atmospheric CO2, they're not limited by the CO2 content in the water, so they can absorb as many nutrients as they want, and it purifies the water, and it helps to keep it in balance. Well, there isn't really much stem plants are going to do really in that situation that floating plants aren't superior at doing. And if we do use stem plants in this type of environment, like, think about it, it goes against the principles of the environment, of what you're trying to achieve in the first instance, because it's supposed to be a low maintenance tank, and then stems are high maintenance, so you need to keep pruning them, replanting them, constant maintenance. It's the type of stuff aquascapers do, and if I'd make the argument that the Walstad method is literally the polar opposite of an aquascape tank in almost every way, shape and form. I love both methods. I love aquascape tanks, high tech aquascape tanks, but I also love the simplicity of the Walstad method, and the whole point of it is supposed to be low maintenance. So you don't want to be pruning stems, you don't want fast growing plants in your tank, you want slow growers that absorb the nutrients, because the whole point is you're building up nutrients slowly and not hammering the system, because then you'd need loads of light, loads of CO2. So as you can see, everything I'm explaining, it all ties into the same fundamental goal. Want to set up a tank where it matures slowly over time. It releases stuff like humic and fulvic acids, which process heavy metals, and it purifies your water to an extent where just nitrogen cycle doesn't do that, and everything ties together. It's really simple once you understand it. You put fish food in, the gravel layer breaks the fish food and waste down into nutrients. The nutrients go into the soil beneath. The soil locks away these nutrients. You don't need the soil to be decomposing and producing nutrients. You want the fish food to be doing that. It's the whole goal, and people are convoluting it, trying to add quirky, wacky things to try and what they're basically doing is trying to differentiate they're trying to create something that differentiates themselves enough from the Walstad method to say, I've created my own thing. But it goes against, it contradicts itself, and it contradicts the book, and it just becomes a contradiction for the sake of being a contradiction in the end, because you're not achieving what you're setting out to achieve, so you start contradicting yourself and then starting to convolute what you're trying to achieve by doing these things. And then finally we've got the water changes, the big debate that goes on. And as I was saying at the beginning, we need water changes. Changing with fresh water, it adds KH, it adds carbonate hardness, it adds carbons, it adds bicarbons, and then it adds GH, it adds magnesium, it adds calcium. All these are micronutrients that the plants need. It's in Tom Barr's methods. All these methods tie into each other. The Walstad method, they all tie into each other. The Walstad method, Tom Barr's, Takashi, they're all based on the same underlying principles. And then when you look at these other things, like, all these principles go out the window because they're that obsessed, that preoccupied with trying to create something different, that they don't realise that they're not actually focusing on plant health, and they're not focusing on how to naturally achieve these methods. So water changes are important. We're pulling stuff out and we're adding fresh stuff in. We're adding our carbonates, we're adding our magnesium, calcium, and like the book says, you can add Epsom salt, you can add calciums, you can add carbonates, you can add potassium, stuff that naturally is going to deplete over time. It gives you the opportunity to re-add them when you're doing water changes and top-offs. So if you're going to do a naturally planted tank like this, we need to focus on these. And then another thing I've noticed is when these other dated tank methods, if you like, when things go wrong, they tell you to do all the stuff that you should be doing anyway. So why not just start with that? Focus on the Walstad method, or Tom Barr's method, or Takashi methods, because they're all unique, but they all work. They all focus on the same underlying principles. So ultimately you're going to create a healthy planted tank. So there we go, there's an overview of the Walstad method. I know it's going to upset a few people, me talking the way I have, and I'm probably going to get a lot of negative comments in the comment section, but I've got to sell this from my point of view. I've been practicing the Walstad method for a decade. I've made many mistakes. I've done a lot of reading, done a lot of researching, and I want to get the information out there. I think my information will stand apart from everyone, or most people I've come across lately on social media. But I get people saying to me, right, the Walstad method's flawed, and I ask them why, and then they explain stuff, and I say that's not what's in Diana Walstad's book. Diana Walstad, warns against these things that these people are promoting. So I have to spend a lot of my time defending Diana Walstad's book as a fan of these naturally planted tanks, because of information that is being shared by people that is wrong to the method, even though they say that their methods are based, or their data tank is based on the Walstad method. It can't be based on the science if it's wrong. And then how do you create a method based on these underpinnings when you get the underpinning method wrong? Like, none of it makes sense, and I have to defend myself against this constantly. So I want to put things right and say, well, these people might say this stuff, but I want to talk about the textbook actual Walstad method that's described using scientific literature in her book, and that's the method I practice, none of these other faddy things that I'm constantly being questioned about. So there you go, guys, that's what it is. I'm probably going to get loads of earache, but look at it from my point of view. I'm getting earache off all these people who are saying it doesn't work, but then give me this misinformation. So there you go, it's out there. Take care.